Hi and welcome to this video in the QPSMR Real Productivity Gain series, and in this video we're going to look at how to use MRDCL plugins in QPSMR. They've also been called snippets and add-ins, but we're going to call them plugins in this video. So first of all, what is a plugin and when will it be an advantage to me? So what this is all about is having a way of doing something that would either be impossible or tedious within QPSMR, but doing it in some way where you're using some of the elements of the MRDCL scripting language. Now that's all covered in a separate video, how to use QPSMR and MRDCL together, and there's indeed a whole series of videos that show you how to use MRDCL. But if you want to use some of the aspects, and I repeat, some of the aspects of MRDCL within QPSMR, you do get some limited access to do that by using these plugins, add-ins or snippets, call them what you will. So let's look at what they are first of all. Now what they are pieces of code that you can call which contain MRDCL script that are then called by QPSMR. So let's just put that into perhaps some more sense to understand what that really means. And I'm going to open up this QDF now. I'm going to open it up in the QPSMR Classic. So let's do that. So here's my project now, and what I'm going to do now is open up some tables that are already been prepared. So here's my tables. Now this particular project doesn't look like the tables, or don't look like anything you would probably usually would put into a QDF, because what we're actually doing here is calling a CL table and we're putting some script in. And a CL table can be anything from script that you're inserting to just a simple table definition. So if I wanted to put a table definition in here, I could insert a table of my own. I could insert some syntax, and I could say that table 1 is $region times $gender. So that would be a way of me getting region by gender. Now of course most QPSMR users wouldn't want to type that syntax because you've got to get it exactly right. You've got to remember to put the hash in there. You need a dollar on the front of the variable name, a star and a comma on the end to get a table of region by gender. But you could do that and it would run perfectly well. If I were to run this and save it, sure enough, there's my first table, region down the side, gender across the top. So I've achieved the same table in a different way. But let's look at these other tables that have been done with perhaps a little bit more disguise or a bit more secrecy by inserting pieces of script that are doing something underneath. Now, first of all, when you want to use a plugin, you've got to decide, well, two things. You've got to decide what that plugin is going to do, and you need somebody who can develop it for you. And MRDC will be releasing some plugins in the near future that you can freely download, but you will also maybe want to get some developed for you. Now, anybody who can use MRDCL script should be able to write a plugin for you if they're up to certainly a competent level, or you can obviously get MRDC to write those for you, and they can do pretty much anything you want. So if you ever find you're in a situation where QPS doesn't let you do some tables that you would like, or you're finding some types of tables very laborious to do within QPSMR, a plugin might be the way to go, and someone or MRDC can write one for you that then you can use. So what do these plugins look like? Now you'll see something about these plugins here. If we look at what's happening here, you'll see that each one of these plugins, or these CL tables that are using plugins, have an insert file. This one's got summary table, this one's summary table 2, this one's summary table 3, and they're inserting a common piece of code, if you like, called do summary table. Now in that file called do summary table, that's where the magic happens. What that's going to do is interpret the parameters or the drivers that you set for your plugin in this insert file and then process them using what would be a generic piece of script that you would keep somewhere on your server or in a location that everyone can access, so that it will, if you like, control what this piece of code here does. And these magic pieces of code can be as clever as you like. So just to give you an example, I've known a client who worked out that from summary tables or from rating scales, they wanted something like 10 different summary table types. So that might be a mean score only table. It might be a summary table with each of the statements side by side as columns. It might be a summary table with each of the tables one underneath the other as rows and percentaged horizontally. It could be each statement with a top 2 box added. It could be with a top 2 box and a bottom 2 box added. It could be a table of all the top 2 boxes. So you could have different versions of information that you'd want to produce just by saying, I want type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, or type 5 type of table. And the magic piece of code inside your Insight Do summary table, or whatever the plugin is called, would then react to the parameters that you're setting here. So let's put some flesh on the bones here and look at what this means. Let's look at what you would do when you set the parameters to drive this particular piece of code. Now, this particular plugin is quite a simple one. It produces a summary table with the columns side by side, and it gives you the option to either show the distributions or to hide them. So, and also to apply a filter. So if we run this plugin, you can see that after my table 1, where I put region by gender as script, we're getting a summary of my 7 statements across the top here based on males, just getting the mean scores. Then I've got another table, which is a summary of the statements again, this time with the distribution and the scores at the bottom, this time filtered on females. And finally, I've got a table that's not filtered. It's got all respondents, all 831 of them, but just the scores only. So this particular plugin's only got 2 options. You can either have the distribution or not the distribution, but obviously a more complex plugin could, for example, add a top 2 box, add a top 2 box and a bottom 2 box, do a mean score summary, rank the means in descending order, all sorts of options that you might want to have available in your plugin. So what actually is driving this particular plugin? You see they've been called tables 50, 51 and 53 down here. They're just random numbers that have been produced. But let's have a look at what's producing that. So to do that, we need to open up the file that contains the drivers that uses the plugin DoSummaryTable.stp. And that could be on your server, so you could keep that in a central file like z:/ something, so that anybody can share that. But you would keep the files here associated with the project. So I'm going to open this up. It could be in Notepad. I'm going to open it up in my editor. And you can see what's going in here is a list of controls. Now, if you didn't know how to, you would always need to know what it is that drives a plugin. So this particular plugin has a number of parameters that have to be set, and they have to be set in a data statement called summary. And you can see that data statement starts with a square bracket, a star, a space, and then the word summary. And then here is where we set all the parameters that are going to drive our particular plugin that does that summary mean score. And of course, you've got to know what all these do. So you either need a crib sheet, or what some people do is they put in a text here that needs replacing so that you can remember what it is you've got to specify here. And if I take you through this particular one, well, this one says that the first parameter, you'll see they're separated by commas. The first parameter in here is list 1. And list 1 is going to contain a list of all the texts that apply to the statements in my rating scale. So that's list 1, and we can see below it here that data list 1 is just a list of statements for a rating scale. You can see we've got speed of booking, ease of booking, speed of journey, comfort, cost, destination, and weather. And if we were to look at our table, you would see that that corresponds to the 7 labels that are appearing across the top here. All right, back to the drivers for our plugin. So these are the drivers. So that's the first parameter that's going to drive the plugin do summary table. The second one's going to tell it what type of table I want. Well, 1 means that I want a distribution, and 2 means, sorry, 1 means I don't want a distribution, 2 means that I do want a distribution. So that's going to control, a 1 or 2 there's going to be the driver that tells it whether to show the distribution and the mean score or just the mean score. This is the table number. This is the title for the table, summary of statements. So if we go back again, you'll see there's the table number 50 and there's the text, summary of statements. The next one tells it the variable name that we're working on. So if we go back to our QDF now, so let's just shut this table, go back to our QDF, you can see the root of this is Q12 with A to G. And again, we could have 2 systems here. We could say that our rating statements are always called A to whatever letter, or they could be _1 down to _ whatever number. Or if you use the grid you can use in QPSMR Insight or CATI, you might call it Q12% A down to whatever letter is coming up in the grid. So you can have a rules for that. If we go back to our plugin, so I've told it it's Q12 is the root. It tells it here there's 7 statements in this rating scale. Now the one here tells it that it's got a filter. So if it's set to 0, it means there's no filter. If there's a 1, there is a filter. And that's followed by the filter definition, which has got $gender a 1. Again, the plugin could be set up so that you didn't have to put in the dollar. So you just typed in that, but this particular plugin has been set up so you have to put the dollar in and the text for the filter. And then there's the list of statements that we referred to just now. So that's what summary table 1 is doing. Let's look at what summary table 2 is doing, and it's remarkably similar. So if we go down to summary table 2 and open that with an editor, here we go again. Same list, it's got the second type of table this time, so we're going to get the distribution. It's called table 51, it's got a different table title. This time we're filtering on gender of 2, which is females. And if we go to the third one and open that, very similar again, it's table 53. And this time we've got a 0, which means we don't want any filter. And it will go ahead and do that for us. So now when we run our tables, let's go back to QPS. Let's open the tables file. And all that tables file contains is one piece of syntax that's got that table. You can mix this, by the way, with tables that have got that you're doing through tables here. The only thing you need to be careful of there is that we've called this table here table 1, and QPS won't know that, so it might well try, and it will try, to open up another table 1. So it's a good habit to put a character on the end of this, like 1A, or put them on, if they're going on the end, it's fine, called 1A, so that you're 1XX, so that it doesn't try and allow you to do another table 1, otherwise you will get an error. So one trick that I often use here, so let's say I did want to insert a table through QPS, and let's do question 3 as the columns, and let's put gender down the side and click OK. Now you can see what it's done. It's made that table 1 as well. And if I run that now, I will get an error. So I don't want that. So I'm going to edit this one here, and I can get around that. I can either make it table 2, or I could say it's 1XX and say F equals NAID, and that will mean that I don't want to show the XX, any of the alpha letters, and it'll just call it table 1 as well. So let's run that now and see how that works. And sure enough, there's the table I added in with question 1, or the table 1, which I've done through a standard table as gender by question 3. Here's the table that we called 1xx in the end, which has got that table done through syntax. And then here's my table using the plugin. So this is setting the parameters. So we only get a mean score, only for males, so 499 people in there. We've got another table for females where I do show the distribution, and another table here where I get a summary again, but for all respondents. So say we wanted another table now which had the full distribution for all respondents. We could do that quite easily. We could go back into here. We might copy this little bit of code here. Just copy and paste that back in. And I'm going to rename that as number 4. And I'm going to edit it. And I'm going to say, okay, I want the type 2 here. And I'm going to call it table 54. I don't want any filter on, so that's fine. I do want a different title here. I'm going to put in my title so it gets its own title. And of course I could change these texts if I wanted to, but I'm not going to here. I'm going to run it as it is. And now to call that, I can just say here that I want table insert syntax, and it copies the previous one through. I want table 4 now. Okay. And I should be able to run that, obviously save it. And if I scroll to the bottom, we should have table 54 now with my title and all 831 with the full distribution and a mean score on the bottom, rather than just the mean score, which was the type of 1 table that I had before. I've now changed it to type 2. So there's an example of a very simple plugin that you might want to use. Your plugins can be much more complicated than that. They can do complex calculations on tables. You can get them to add rows together. You really can do what you like. So if there's a table that's frustrating you that either you can't quite do in QPS or is laborious to do in QPS, a plugin might be the route to go. You will need to have it built either by somebody who knows how to make such a plugin, but once you've got that plugin, you can use it and reuse it from project to project. So now if I wanted to use this plugin on a different project, I would just make sure I either had access to do summary table in a central store, central folder that anything can be found from, or I might want to copy it to the directory I'm working in if I wish to, which is what I've done in this particular case. And then all I've got to do is set the parameters for a different project. So on a different project, it might be appropriate to say that, so on a different project, I might say, well, I want my list to be in list 99. I want the type 1. I want the table to be this. It's working on question 5, and there's 12 rating statements and so on. And then in here, this will be list 99, and I'd have my 12 statements across here. So I could use, basically all you're doing here is specifying drivers that are going to use a plugin that automatically generates the code. So do you want a quick look at the plugin that's doing all the work? Okay, well, let's just quickly do that. This is really for people who can use MRDCL and do scripting. What they're doing is they're picking up the parameters that you're setting in that data summary statement. So in the drivers we had just now, we were setting the type as the second parameter, the table number as the third one, the number of statements as the sixth one, whether there was a filter as the seventh one, and so on. And these parameters then get used to drive script. Now you really need to understand a little bit more about MRDCL to do that. So this is not something that you can do without some training. But if you're interested in doing this, we can either train you to do that, or we can write them for you, and you can have your own plugins that really can shorten the time significantly that you spend on doing either complex tables or just tables that you can't do, or tables that you perhaps find that you're manipulating yourself in the output CSV file, the table CSV file that QPS generates. So if you want to know more about plugins and what they can really do and whether they can help you, please contact our support desk. We'd be very pleased to help you and guide you as to the best way to solve your particular solution, and perhaps more importantly, to improve your productivity. Thanks for joining us in this video.